Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back again with Ronnie Feldman for the award-winning Creativity and Compliance. Ronnie, how does that sound, award-winning?
It's pretty good. I haven't even promoted that yet, but I appreciate you so much for putting this into the world. I'm glad people are enjoying it.
Ronnie, I want to take a standard Tom Fox says every podcast, every webinar phrase, and see if maybe we can turn it on its head a little bit. And what I say is more effective compliance equates to greater business efficiency, equates to greater ROI. But you've flipped that on me because you've said that greater compliance, greater efficiency in delivering of your compliance message leads to no compliance issues. And frankly, I can't think of a more effective compliance program than one that doesn't have compliance issues.
Right.
Why is it that we can move from a reactive or a detect mode to a prevent or a proactive mode through effective delivery of compliance communications? And what are some of the strategies that you would advocate?
Yeah, it's kind of like almost so obvious that we forget to talk about it sometimes because the compliance programs get really complex and there's a lot of complex issues, a lot of risks and new technologies and all that stuff. But just think about what the DOJ guidance recently said. Really, there's a lot in there, but at its core, every time that they provide new guidance, it's all about being more effective in your program, right? They want you to show what you're doing and why you think that's a way to prevent problems. It's all about being proactive and preventative at its core. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to prevent problems. And I would argue that the things that we've been talking about since we started this podcast are more efficient solutions. And this is relevant to every program because we all have limited time and resources. So how can you efficiently prevent problems? How can you efficiently prevent problems? At its core, we know that big boring training that we do annually, most of us, unfortunately, doesn't work. They don't learn. They come away pissed off, and they feel like you wasted their time. And so it doesn't mitigate risk in any way. I would argue that exacerbates risk. So if we're going to start from scratch and go, how are we going to orient our programs? These are the things that I would suggest. And I want to make the argument through the discussion with you that it is a more efficient way to run your program. One, train less, communicate more. Now, this is not to say training isn't important, but doing an annual training, even if it's good, is not enough. So we need to, because there's other factors in play around why people do what they do. So we need to find ways to be in the atmosphere more regularly, be top of mind for them. So that means communicate more. This could be nudge learning. This could be little communications. This can be ways to integrate and embed the compliance message, the speak up message, the psychological safe message into the fabric of your organization on a more regular basis. So that's your regular comms, monthly communications. That's like embedding message within your having leaders play a little message in their regular Zoom or Teams meetings regularly. It's having ethics ambassadors and leaders train their employees. So you creating stuff for them to train others. So not making compliance an other, making it embedded. And then of course, you're never going to get access to those channels or get them to do that unless it's fun, interesting, entertaining, engaging. Let me see if there's a couple of things I want to say. So yeah. And embedded in that is that if you have to spend money on training, if you want to spend money on training, it should be on leadership. So we need to educate and get leaders on our side. And then we need to empower them to carry that message forward and then integrate that message into their, daily work streams. Parallel to that is focusing on speak up culture and what I would call like just-in-time learning, which is you have to be around when problems occur. So that means more regular communication. So they know where policies and resources are, and they know that there's a team of people to support them when they need help. These are all things that are oriented around prevention versus one thing that I hate, annual training with an opt-out, which means it's a bad training. They're going to opt out because they know the information and they haven't really learned anything. And you certainly haven't reinforced it over time. All right. there's my little monologue on that. I want to, by the way, before we're done, talk about how this will cost you less time and money. But what do you think about that as a premise to begin with?
We're going to have a little test. And we're going to have a little test to see if your theory is correct. And we're going to have that little test through a lightning round. And how we're going to do this is we had an FCPA enforcement action last week called Telefono Venezuela. And I wrote a blog post today with 10 lessons learned for the compliance professional.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you each lesson learned. And I want you to give back to the audience the message you would craft in a 15, 30, 60-second message, just reminding people to be cognizant of these facts. And if they come across these facts, raise your hand and call the compliance department.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah. All right. Let's do it.
here we go. Number one, if you're doing business in a high risk jurisdiction, you need a high risk management solution.
I don't even, honestly, when I hear that, I don't know exactly what you mean by that. But what I would say is if you're in a high risk community, that means you have the more frequent communications around issue spotting and where you go for help around that. And again, if you want to do that more frequently, you have to find a way to mix up the message in more creative ways so it doesn't start falling on deaf ears and become like that speak up wallpaper that you've put up that no one ever looks at. So you got to find a way to message them more frequently and embed that message into the flow of their business. So they see it more regularly and they know that it's important.
In 2001, the largest number of FCPA enforcement actions involved third parties. In 2023, the largest number of FCPA enforcement actions involved third parties. This enforcement action involved third parties. How would you communicate to the business unit, to the business professional, to the BD guy, if there's a third party involved? Be careful out there.
Yeah, again, there's a couple of different ways to do this. One is obviously the people who are dealing with third parties, they need some education, right? So that's a matter of reinforcing the importance of vetting and knowing your customer and knowing your third parties, and again, helpful tips for potential problems. And I love reorienting the idea around by calling out problems, we're making the organization stronger. We don't want to be associated with doing bad stuff, and so this taps into everybody's. We all think we have integrity, so you want them to be part of a solution. So one is orienting their messaging around them helping to solve a problem, and the business wants you to do that. The other idea I had, though, is you can't always control everything about your third parties, but the more you can pre-package easily digestible training and communications about how you expect them to do business and providing it them to cascade that forward, that's something that you can proactively do. These are the standards, not the sign in a test. Right? You send them the thing. They say, yeah, we attest that we're going to do that because some procurement officers are just going to fill that out. I'm talking about packaging up a little short micro learning, giving it to them and say, you disperse this to your people.
Remember Hill Street Blues?
Uh-huh.
I always thought, although I think it was written for New York, I always thought and in my mind, Hill Street was in Chicago. So I'm going to pretend like Hill Street was in Chicago and you're in Chicago, so it all makes sense. And perhaps my most favorite line from Hill Street Blues was, let's be careful out there, which was what the duty sergeant said every day when he gave the duty assignments in the morning. So I've always loved that line, let's be careful out there. And that really leads to the next point, which is the management of a third party doesn't end when you sign a contract with them. It continues during that relationship. And one of the ways to manage that is ongoing monitoring, whether it's transaction monitoring, whether it's sitting down and talking to them about how they do business. What would be a short snippet you could communicate, compliance could communicate to the business unit? It's not just when the contract's signed, meaning it's not just due diligence and contract terms. It's an ongoing relationship.
I'm always a big fan of just being action oriented. So setting them information about the policy and expectations is one thing, but the other is what do you want them to do? So I think then if you're going to do more regular communications with the business about how to be mindful that you're working with good partners is to say, here are watchful tips for making sure that these are the things that are important. look out for red flags. And these red flags could be A, B, C, D, and E. There's, by the way, we've made so many games on red flags. It's an easy gamified concept where you're like, look out for this, look out for this, look out for this, look out for this. Short, digestible, action oriented things that they can do. And then quick why on that's important. And that ties back into, hey, we don't want to be associated with doing bad stuff. Help us do that. It's important, not just that we're winning business but that we're winning business the right way.
Let me switch the focus from the BD guy on the front lines to someone sort of in the back of the house in the accounting department or in the finance department, and specifically the accounts payable clerk who gets in the invoice from the third party to pay a commission, to pay something. How would you craft a short, targeted message to someone who is actually a gatekeeper, but may just be an AP clerk to say, if you see something, say something. If something doesn't look right on your screen when you compare it to what they're supposed to bill for, raise your hand. How do you make a message to higher level gatekeeper, even if that higher level gatekeeper may be further lower on the corporate totem pole?
At the risk of repeating myself, I think that one of the issues is simplifying messaging and find creative ways to deliver that messaging. You want to increase the frequency of that messaging and make it interesting and clever. So I tend to do a lot with music. So if it's know your customer and watch out for A, B, C, D, and E, that's a 60-second message. You sing a song about that. You could do top 10 things to watch out for to make the workplace better. It's a commercial, like a fake commercial or a movie trailer, there's a million ways to make video content. There's memes about that. You can create little memes, but it's about simplifying messaging, finding creative wrapping around that and get it down to a couple of quick steps. And you don't have to boil the ocean. Maybe there's one that you put out every 3 or 4 weeks that reminds them of 3 or 4 things versus an annual thing that's 20 pages. They won't remember it and doesn't stay top of mind.
How about the fact that Telefono Venezuela is in the communications industry? We've had multiple FCPA enforcement actions in the communications industry because the communications industry is actually high risk because you're having to get a license from a government official. It also gives you the opportunity to see what happens to other competitors. So, how would you communicate to BD folks, once again, following my theme of let's be careful out there, if you have your competitors who get into trouble? Or if it's not a competitor, direct competitor, it's another telephone company or another communication company. Can you use somebody else's screw up to communicate to your team, hey, let's be careful out there?
Yeah, absolutely. And the DOJ, that they even said you got to incorporate lessons learned, right, in this latest guidance. My watch out there, because I think this is an obvious yes, use whatever information you can to make it relevant to people, is to not tell that story in a boring way. So most case studies are just that dry, they're stripped, and they're just facts. This happened and this happened. But that story of how it went bad is really interesting. There's corruption going on there where everyday good people screw up for a variety of reasons because of pressure. And it just shows you how people's default tends to think when something bad happens, they don't think it applies to them because they think it's bad people doing bad things. So these stories are a great way to contextualize the fact that integrity is not something that you have or you don't have. It's something you got to work at every day. And here's an example with lots of specifics and heroes and villains and crises and pressure. And those are really interesting stories that can help contextualize why good people will sometimes do bad things. Yeah. Case studies ripped from the headlines. What did you say? Hell Street Blues? I'll do Law and Order. Law and Order ripped from the headlines. From almost the most popular, when I survey my clients, the most popular thing read in every organization is when they tell the true stories of what happened in their organization. Use it.
What about if we took everything that you just said, which is storytelling, which is heroes and villains, which is pressures, which is opportunities, which is money, and put that into a 5-minute story that you cut up into 30-second bites and you send out, or 1-minute bites. Could that be a part of an efficient way to communicate? Let's be careful out there.
Absolutely. There's a variety of techniques, and I advocate for anything that has a creative approach to it because, of course, this is how we consume information in our everyday lives. Because the more we make it sterile and preachy and boring, people just, they don't engage in it. So love the idea of storytelling. Let's think about the different mediums you can do that. So obviously you can create, we have something in our library called Tales from the Hotline, real stories about compliance behavior gone wrong. And we just happen to have comedians who retell the story to make it interesting, but they are true stories. Podcasts, more and more companies keep talking to me about how they're doing podcasts as a great storytelling technique. And the thing that I love about that creative convention is you can learn while not sitting in front of a computer. And this gets dicey about, can you require people to take their training over audio? But like sales reps are in their cars or people are commuting, people listen to podcasts. I think that's a great way to tell a story about something that went wrong and provide lessons, perhaps wrapped around an interview with one of your executives to share that information. So yeah, videos, there's, of course, they can be written stories that tends to be less dynamic, but remember, make it a case study, but make it a case study that has meaty, interesting beginning, middle, and end and conflict. And eh, just Google good storytelling. There's 4 or 5 aspects. You don't even need to do that. Pretend you're talking to a friend at a bar and tell the story that way.
That was great, Ronnie. And Ronnie just gave us 5 snippets of communications you could put out based upon an FCPA enforcement action from last week that reminded business unit people, gatekeepers such as AP clerks, of their role. And the most important part for me is, if you see something, say something. If you have a question, raise your hand. You don't have to decide alone. And you're not alone. If we can even go back to your improv days, you're not alone,
Yeah.
which you've said innumerable times.
Well, to try and button this up and get us back to this, I like how the conversation kind of veered, which is always interesting for me and hopefully for the audience. But you talk about the idea of positivity and prevention and being more efficient in the way you orient your program. I'm making the argument that shortening seat time for employees around their how much training they have to do, actually shortening that training and making it more communications and less time passing the traditional quiz, that costs less to execute and it saves time for them. They're spending less time in front of the computer trying to like click through and while they're doing laundry, pretending that they're learning something. It also takes less time for you because you don't have to chase down as many completion rates. And by spending more time increasing your exposure with short communications and nudge learning, you're actually impacting the culture and staying top of mind. That's more efficient. And you also have the added benefit of promoting psychological safety and the resources that are around you. So I feel that not only is it more preventative, um, but it costs less and it's a more efficient way to do that. And the backbone behind all of this is it's got to be interesting, playful, positive, and creative. And that will help you execute these things.
Ronnie, I want to take that and move back to actually where we started, which is the efficiency of preventing rather than detecting is the money savings. And when you can actually not have something happen, you're always going to be better off. And so I was wondering if we might end on you with maybe a few thoughts on why you think it's so efficient to move to that proactive state with your compliance communications.
Yeah. These reasons, obviously, we have to remember that the goal is to prevent problems, right? I think sometimes we get caught up in such the nuance. I can't tell how many programs focus on, they're like, measurement is the most important thing. And I'm like, not really. Like measurement's extremely important to show what you did, but the measurement, you're supposed to be measuring things that prevent problems, not just, so what many programs do is they just do that annual training because it's the easiest thing to track and measure. And that drives me crazy because it's a little bass backwards. So I'm arguing that there are other measurement tools. The DOJ said that there's other measurement tools that you can use, access to policies, culture surveys, how many touch points you have, having leaders certify that they have played their compliance commercial once a month. There's a million things you can do that are more, that get you more visibility and exposure, that focus on psychological safety and speak up culture. And that the fact that there's a sense of organizational justice, those kinds of things that we need to promote more regularly, because all the social science and behavioral science says that is more effective than just doing that annual training. So yes, positive, proactive, train less, communicate more, be interesting and thoughtful about it. And it has to prevent more problems, because it does in every other parts of our aspects of our life. It's a proven successful way to educate and empower people to do the right thing.
Ronnie, I think we wrap this one up with a nice button or bow. What do
Well,
you
I hope
think?
so. I hope people are enjoying hearing my ramblings about this, because you and I know philosophically that these things are helpful. Sometimes wrapping that up in a nice conversation is sometimes challenging, but I want to encourage everybody to keep trying to make things better and not just do what you've always done. And ultimately, that will always be a better solution for you.
Ronnie, I can't wait to see what we come up with next.
Thank you, buddy.